In the Alps, in the center of Upper Boogie, a narrow strip of land stretches between the mountains. It connects France with Switzerland, and at its very heart lies a lake, a small lake, but unlike others, it is of a crystal clear, sparkling blue color. This is Lake Nantua. In his travel notes of 1835, Alexandre Dumas wrote that this lake was a precious pearl. Many years later, a highway was built nearby, and the lake became a favorite destination for pilgrims and tourists alike, both from France and from neighboring countries. This story began before Christmas 2008 on the shore of Lake Nantua, in the village of Montréal-la-Cluse. Only 3,500 people live there. It is a rather quiet, peaceful place. Among its cozy low buildings and winding streets hides a tiny post office that serves no more than 15 customers a day. The clerk who runs it is named Catherine Burgod. She has worked here for 16 years and has developed her own little ritual. Her friends come to drink coffee in the tiny kitchen behind the main post office room. The first arrivals take one of the rickety chairs. The last sit on the windowsill. They drink coffee, laugh, and chat about life and men. Catherine gladly joins the conversation, despite the fact that after 20 years of marriage, she is in the process of a divorce. At times, she utters frightening phrases such as, "I've ruined everything. It would be better for me to end it all in one stroke." She made her first attempt to end her life in November 2007, and the second in the summer of 2008, when she was already pregnant. She was expecting a child by her boyfriend, a shy village boy she had met in a nightclub. And when on December 19, 2008, at exactly 9:05 a.m., a carpenter who had come to collect a parcel discovered Catherine's body in a pool of blood, the first thing people thought was, she has finally succeeded in doing what she intended. A police car parked across from the post office at 9:38. The gendarmes were also told there was nothing to investigate. The case seemed clear. Then the village doctor entered the post office and immediately understood that Catherine had been murdered. She had been stabbed multiple times. Her child, whom she carried under her heart, died with her. Suddenly, fear settled over the town. Shops and administrative offices closed. A kind of improvised curfew. Someone placed a white rose in front of the post office. The victim was Catherine Burgod. She was 41 years old. Catherine was born and spent her entire life in Montréal-la-Cluse. Her father, Raymond, worked at the town hall and had recently retired. Therefore, everyone knew both the family and Catherine very well. Her father zealously protected and cared for his daughter because he had lost his wife, Catherine's mother, and the two of them were left alone. The tragedy brought them closer together, and father and daughter cared deeply for one another. For this reason, Raymond was simply devastated by his daughter's murder. It was an unimaginable grief and shock for him. Catherine had two children, 8-year-old schoolgirl Justine and 19-year-old student Cédric, who studies in Lyon. Catherine had separated from her husband, but they had not officially finalized the divorce. At the time of her death, Catherine was expecting a child by her boyfriend. But this happiness never came for the couple. For the children, it was an equally profound tragedy. Only a few days remained until the new year, and this joyful family occasion was overshadowed by a terrible loss. Everyone was devastated. A few days later, the pathologist performed an autopsy on Catherine's body. He discovered 28 wounds on her body, including defensive wounds, which indicated that she had tried to defend herself when she was attacked. Investigators assessed the crime scene where they were to work. The post office was cozily situated on a small uphill street. Almost nothing indicated its presence. The door opened directly onto the street. There was a yellow mailbox on the facade, and that was practically the only sign that a post office stood before you. Recently, a service point of the French National Railway Company had also been located there, meaning that train tickets could be purchased on site. The post office had no cameras, nothing that could reveal what had happened, who had entered or who had left. The branch consisted of 2 rooms, the main area and a small break room with a safe, a sink, and a little table where Catherine could have a cup of coffee. It was in this back room that the body was discovered. Catherine was likely caught off guard by the attacker, who struck her with the first knife blow. She rushed toward the exit, but the killer followed her and continued stabbing. She collapsed to the floor and a pool of blood spread around her. The murder weapon and the victim's phone were missing. Yet the phone had definitely been with Catherine, because that morning she had sent a message to a friend. The perpetrator took all the money, from the post office register, the SNCF register, and even from the safe. In total, he made off with between €1,500 and €3,000. The police were unable to determine the exact amount. The police's first assumption was robbery. Catherine was a strong-willed person, and she would not have handed over the money to a robber without a fight. Therefore, he might have lost control and killed her over a couple of €1,000. The second assumption was that this was a premeditated murder of Catherine, staged to look like a robbery. In that case, the victim would have known the killer. It was easier to verify the second version, and that is where the police began their work. From Catherine's schedule on the morning of the murder, it is known that she left home at around 7 a.m. with her daughter Justine, whom she was driving to school. On the way, they stopped to buy chocolate rolls. This, too, was one of their habits, stopping at the bakery. She then stopped by one of her friends to pick up a pair of hemmed jeans. Mother and daughter arrived at the post office, where Catherine switched off the alarm at 8:24. She sent an SMS to a friend and began preparing to process orders in the post office, and then at the SNCF service point. Catherine and Justine settled in the kitchen, where the girl ate her chocolate roll, then kissed her mother and left for school at 8:40. The body was found at 9:05. This left a 30-minute window during which an unknown assailant attacked the postal clerk. Since no one saw or heard anything, no car speeding away with squealing tires, no one running, it appeared that the perpetrator may have been in the immediate vicinity of the post office. The unknown person who arrived right after the post office opened seemed to know her work schedule. But did he also know his victim? Investigators learned that Catherine was in the midst of an unpleasant divorce from her husband. Being a jealous man, he took the separation badly. He openly admitted that his wife had felt lonely because he worked a great deal. He also confessed to extramarital affairs during their marriage. Then one day, when he came home, Catherine simply told him in 2 sentences that she no longer loved him and wanted to separate. She had made up her mind, and he could not influence her decision. He wrote and called her many times, trying to reconcile, but it did not help. In the end, he decided to leave his wife alone. He found a new girlfriend. But here is what is curious. That girlfriend left him as well. On the very evening before Catherine's murder, at the girlfriend's workplace party, they discussed their relationship for the last time, and the lover did not change her mind. After the party, she went home, and he went to his own place. Before that, however, he stopped at a pizzeria and called a colleague at the office to say that the weekly briefing scheduled for 8:30 a.m. the next day, the day of the murder, would not take place. He explained this by problems with his mother. He had never canceled briefings before. In other words, he canceled the office meeting at exactly the time of the murder. The man told police that he had not left his apartment that morning. A neighbor saw his car in the parking lot at 8:25. He logged into his home computer at 9:09. This left a 45-minute window that precisely coincided with the time of the crime. To the police, the ex-husband appeared to be a promising suspect. A man who had just been left by his lover, who learned that his wife was expecting a child by another man, might have lost control and decided to commit murder out of revenge. But here was the catch. The theory of a crime of passion collapsed with a crash over one element. Forensic experts discovered DNA at the crime scene. Male DNA was found at Catherine's workstation and on a fabric sports bag whose origin was unclear. The DNA was mixed with Catherine's blood, making it a very important discovery for the investigation. Since the police had virtually no other evidence, the investigating judge decided to collect DNA samples, even from villagers who had never been considered suspects. For example, someone could fall under suspicion simply because their phone had been switched off at the time of the attack. Not a single sample matched, including those of Catherine's ex-husband and her new partner. This promising lead led nowhere, and the investigators found themselves at a dead end. But soon, the situation changed. At the end of January, 2 sisters decided to visit the cemetery. Pushing open the cemetery gate, they walked among the graves of those who had found their final resting place there. Finding Catherine's grave was not difficult. The marble slab was buried beneath wreaths and flowers. Nearby, on a neighboring grave, a man sat with his back to them. He looked devastated. The women spoke to him, admitting that they too were mourning, sharing in the grief. The man straightened up. He was crying. In his hand was a can of beer, and when he began to speak, the sisters realized that this might not have been his first drink. But what struck the sisters was not that, but the fact that he began talking about Catherine's murder. The man suddenly declared, "I'm sure he killed her like this," and made a gesture as if grabbing someone from behind and pressing a knife to their throat. He continued, skillfully acting out the scene in roles, and the sisters were amazed at how realistic he made it look. Then the man described the crime scene and noted that, by his calculations, the killer must have taken about 3,000 euros. When he stepped back to the cemetery gate, the women simultaneously said, "What if he is the killer?" They contacted the police, assuming that either the man himself could be the perpetrator or that someone might have told him how the crime occurred. The investigators decided he absolutely had to be questioned. Finding him turned out to be very easy. After all, he had told the sisters that he lived near the post office and that he was an actor. The man was identified as Gerald Thomasin. He did indeed live near the post office, which meant he could have disappeared into his home within seconds after the attack on Catherine. Of course, the police had already spoken with him earlier while searching for possible witnesses. He stated that that morning he had been asleep, alone. The gendarmes noticed nothing suspicious. Gerald did not deny that he knew the victim. It was he who had left the white rose at the post office, because he and Catherine had, one might say, become friendly. When he first pushed open the door of the main post office in Montreal-la-Cluse, he told the postal clerk that he wanted to move there and open an account. The clerk, Catherine Bergaud, handed him a form, and in the line marked profession, he wrote, actor. Catherine thought the new postal client was quite a fantasist, but as soon as the door closed behind him, she typed his name into a search engine and, to her astonishment, learned that Gerald Thomasin really was an actor. He had more than 20 roles to his credit, and at the age of 16, he had received a César, a kind of French equivalent of the Oscar. After that, Catherine met Gerald repeatedly when he came to collect a money transfer at the beginning of each month. They were invariably polite to one another, and once the new acquaintance even brought her a DVD of his latest film. But how did it come to pass that the holder of the prestigious César Award, an actor who had been in films since childhood, ended up living in a modest one-room apartment near the post office in a small French town? Life had not always been kind to Gerald. He never knew his father. His mother struggled with alcoholism, and he and his brother Jérôme were placed in a foster family, where for 7 years the boys were beaten and forced to do the most unpleasant and heavy chores around the house. According to Jérôme, it was slavery, worse than slavery. The children became servants to their foster parents. Everything changed when a teacher told Gerald about a casting call in Paris. The boy decided he had nothing to lose and went to try his luck. Later, director Jacques Doyon recalled that what struck him most about Gerald was not that he was the most talented, but that he was the most genuine. It touched him above all. Thus, the teenager landed a role in the famous Cult 1990 French drama Le Petit Criminel, The Little Gangster, a film about a young hooligan. Incredibly, Gerald won a César Award for his very first film role. After that, he was fortunate enough to appear in other films. He acted alongside Vincent Cassel in the horror film La Haine, and his final film role was in Jacques Doyon's Premier Rendezvous in 2008. Gerald primarily worked in auteur films and was often compared to Patrick Dewey. However, immersion in the bohemian lifestyle led to his dizzying fall into a world of alcohol and illegal substances. Despite having close friends and supporters, he sank almost to rock bottom. For the police, this suggested that he might have been capable of attempting a post office robbery for a couple of thousand euros. On February 6, 2009, Gerald's house was filled with gendarmerie specialists wearing white hooded suits. They closed the shutters, sprayed luminol, and found blood that had clearly been attempted to be cleaned. But Gerald explained that he had cut himself while trying to make a sandwich. Neighbors upstairs confirmed that they had taken the man to the emergency room. Overall, the suspect behaved quite openly, even naively. Without any prompting from the police, he took out a knife he always carried with him and showed it to the investigators. The knife was important to him because he had used it during the filming of the first encounter. The police were interested in the knife, but it bore no traces of Catherine's blood. Gerald's story never changed. On that fateful morning, he was at home, sleeping, and was awakened by the gendarmes. Since the events occurred early in the morning and he was alone, he had no witnesses. He did not deny the meeting with the sisters at the cemetery, but explained that he was an actor with a vivid imagination. He simply imagined how the events could have unfolded, how he saw them in his mind, or at least how he would have portrayed them in a film. The investigators had no evidence of his involvement nor any hint of a confession from the actor. Most importantly, his DNA did not match the DNA of the suspected killer. Due to the lack of evidence, Gerald was released from custody, though he remained the prime suspect. However, the case had not revealed all its secrets. In the town of Montreal-Lacluse, 6 months had passed, and the fever of the tragedy began to subside. Summer was rising over Lake Nantua, and the first vacationers from the Netherlands had settled in the campsite. At the home of Raymond, Catherine's father, visitors were becoming increasingly rare. The gendarmes no longer came around as often as before. The only one left deeply affected was Catherine's ex-husband. The poor man did not sleep, did not eat, and did not leave the house. From time to time, when he felt particularly restless, he would drive past the post office and Gerald's apartment. One July day, he saw the actor jump off his bicycle. The man followed Gerald. He lunged at him like a predatory bird attacking a small prey, shouting, "You killed my wife. You killed the mother of my children. You staged a robbery," and began beating him. He demanded that the actor confess to what had happened, but Gerald screamed that he had nothing to do with the murder or the robbery. When Catherine's ex finally let go of his victim, he demanded that Gerald leave the town, warning that next time he would kill him. Since the man faced no punishment for this brazen midday attack, Gerald took the advice to heart, packed up his modest belongings, and moved to Rochefort, where he settled in a tent. The case weighed heavily on his shoulders. Gerald was no longer being invited to act in films and sank ever deeper into despair. Periodically, he was called in for questioning, apparently in the hope that he would confess or inadvertently reveal a crucial detail to the investigators. After one such interrogation at the station on the evening of June 24, 2013, Gerald called his brother Jérôme. Gerald was practically incoherent from drinking so much. He told his brother that he intended to go to the police and claim that he had killed Catherine. He reassured his shocked brother that, in fact, he had not killed her, but by doing so he could find out what the police knew and why they would not leave him alone. He even added, "They already know perfectly well that it wasn't me." Jérôme managed to persuade his brother not to rush and to call back once he had sobered up a little. However, the brothers did not know that officers had been eavesdropping on their conversation. On June 26th, Gerald was taken into custody and formally charged. He faced life imprisonment because Catherine had worked at the post office as a civil servant, which was considered an aggravating circumstance. Gerald's friend, the well-known actress Béatrice Dalle, with whom he had worked on a film, turned to the prestigious and respected law firm of Eric Dupont-Moretti. As soon as the lawyers took the case, they managed, against all expectations, to have the transfer of the case to trial cancelled. Gerald was still charged, but the investigation effectively started over. He was assigned to 2 new investigating judges who were tasked with examining the case from a fresh perspective. After 2 years of pre-trial detention, the actor was temporarily released. One morning, he sat on the windowsill of his kitchen, counted to 100, and then jumped 2 floors down. After a stay in intensive care and a kidney removal, he was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. At that very moment, years after Catherine's murder, a new character emerged. A fairly marginal resident of Montreal-Lacluse named Anthony contacted the police. He was a short man in his 30s with a teardrop tattoo on his right cheek and a criminal record. He did not shy away from taking illegal substances, often mixing them with alcohol. Apparently, on one such day, when his mind was completely clouded, he called the police and claimed that Gerald had committed the murder while he, Anthony, was standing outside near the post office. The man was summoned to the police station but simply did not appear, and the officers did not rush to arrest him. After a few months, when Anthony was detained for some other minor offense, investigators questioned him about Catherine's murder. He insisted that he had never said such a thing. It was complete nonsense. But by then it was too late. The wheels of the police investigation were already turning with renewed momentum, and no one intended to release the suspect. Anthony was charged with complicity. 8 years after the attack on the postal clerk, 2 men, Gerald and Anthony, were to stand trial. It seemed the case was approaching its conclusion. But an incredible surprise was about to turn the entire investigation upside down. 10 years after the horrific crime, on July 5, 2016, a young man driving an ambulance was arrested near Lake Nanchua. People speculated that it was for speeding, but the truth would soon come out. The arrest was connected to the crime. The arrested man was under 30, soon to be married, with an apartment already purchased and children's rooms planned. Everyone knew him because he was a talented football player. In the 10 years of investigation, his name had never appeared in any of the case files. The gendarmes might have passed him by, had it not been for one incident in 2016. He had taken a bank card belonging to a girl he met online and withdrew €600 from it. The girl reported him to the police. He was arrested, and a DNA sample was taken. Who could have imagined that a few months later, his DNA would match the sample found at the post office? The young man's name is Mamadou Diallo. When Catherine was murdered, he was 19, a local village boy who knew Montreal-Lacluse very well. By November 2017, he was practicing as a paramedic. In his football club, he was suspected of stealing other people's belongings, including money. At first, Mamadou denied everything, claiming that he had only been to the post office twice in his life, and both times with his mother. Reluctantly, he then admitted that he had been there that morning, had found Catherine's body, and had cowardly run away. But when he was confronted with the DNA match, he had to change his story again. On that day, he needed to go to the post office's SNCF office to buy a train ticket because he planned to travel to celebrate New Year's with friends and had some preparations to make in advance. Mamadou entered the post office building but was greeted by no one. He peeked into the back room, saw the open door, the blood, and the woman on the floor. He was horrified, but he approached the postal clerk to check if she was still breathing. When he realized she could not be helped, he left, but not before taking all the money from both the post office cash register and the SNCF counter. That was how he left his DNA behind. He claimed that he had been traumatized by the scene and was afraid he would be accused of the murder, so he told no one. In other words, he had the courage to steal the money, but not to call an ambulance or the police. Furthermore, the time he claimed to have entered the post office did not match the time when Catherine was believed to have already been killed. Overall, Mamadou's version sounded highly unconvincing. By the summer of 2016, there were already 3 suspects in the case, each of whom insisted on their innocence. For Gerald, the DNA match brought long-awaited relief. He called his brother and told him that the police had finally found the perpetrator. He felt happy, sensing that he was approaching the exit of this dark tunnel. However, Mamadou's lawyer insisted on a meeting of all the suspects, a sort of face-to-face confrontation. Gerald Thomasin was encouraged by the idea of this meeting. For him, it was a chance to finally lift the weight of the case from his shoulders. The meeting was scheduled for August 29, 2019. Gerald was supposed to travel from Rochefort to Lyon. He boarded a train but never appeared at the meeting. At first, everyone assumed he had simply changed his mind. In reality, he never showed up anywhere again. On August 29th at 9:30 a.m., he boarded a train from Rochefort to Nantes, where a connection had been planned. It is known for certain that he arrived in Nantes, but he never boarded the next train. Surveillance cameras captured him leaving the station, and after that, no one saw him again. His phone also last registered activity in the area near the station. Was he abducted out of fear that he would reveal the real killer, as his brother Jérôme speculated? Or did he run away, afraid of returning to prison, where he had spent 2 years due to the slow pace of the French police? Or, as his friends believe, did he get involved with a bad crowd, which ended in a fight he did not survive? Whatever the case, the Lyon meeting went on without him. Only several years later did the court decide to dismiss the case against Gerald and his alleged accomplice Anthony. Only Mamadou Diallo faced the judge. The prosecution did not immediately succeed in securing a guilty verdict. After the first trial, Mamadou was acquitted, and the prosecutor filed an appeal. On the second attempt, Mamadou was found guilty of both the robbery and the murder of Catherine. In 2023, he was sentenced to 16 years in prison, even though he had faced the possibility of life imprisonment. Raymond, Catherine's father, had struggled to attend even the first trial due to health issues, and he passed away in 2023 without seeing the man responsible for his daughter's murder punished. As for Gerald Thomasin's disappearance, it remains a mystery to this day. The little criminal, an innocent man, as he had insisted to the police from the very beginning, is still missing. Director Nicolas Klotz, who cast him in the film Outcast, called him one of the greatest in French cinema. It is a pity that, despite his talent, sincerity, and obsessive dedication to his craft, fate was not always kind to him. The police, having spent a decade pursuing an innocent man, have now begun investigating his enigmatic disappearance.